Hello everybody. Welcome to this session on MSMEs and financial inclusion. I'm Brinda from Sattva Consulting. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome all of you here and happy to extend a very warm welcome to our two speakers today. Before I go into the speaker introductions, a little bit on the session for today. So as you all know, MSMEs are a backbone of Indian economy. About 63 million enterprises under MSME category in India, which contribute to around 45% of our total manufacturing output, 40% of our exports, and nearly 28% of our GDP comes from MSMEs. They employ around 110 to 120 million people. So in terms of employment of people, they are next to agriculture, which happens to be the largest sector, of course, in India that employs people. So quite obvious that they are extremely crucial for our economy. And given the current situation with business and manufacturing lockdown, unfortunately, they are also the ones who bore the worst brunt of it. Because being so small, of course, they are unlikely to have the kind of resource that big businesses sometimes may have to kind of get through this time period when not much production is happening, but you have fixed costs, plus you are very uncertain of future and uncertain of demand picking up in the coming times. So how do we help MSMEs? So initially, when we started thinking about what this session should focus on, we were thinking about what would some measures be that would help MSMEs. And then the announcements from the government came this week. So slowly we've been hearing about the package and the details of that package, the total package around 20 lakh crore, out of that 3 lakh crore for MSMEs. And so I think the session has come at the very right time. And fortunately, we have two really good experts who are going to be able to tell us about what the package means for Indian MSMEs. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome Mr. Mukesh Gulati, who is a senior advisor to foundations for MSME clusters. He's an internationally acknowledged expert on MSMEs. He has worked with the government as well as many global institutions on their MSME-related initiatives and projects. In conversation with Mr. Mukesh Gulati will be our second speaker today, Mekin Maheshwari. He's a co-founder of GAME, Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship, as well as a non-profit called Udyam Learning Foundation that focuses on fostering entrepreneurship in many different formats. Before that, Mekin was part of the original micro enterprise called Flipkart that went on then to become a billion-dollar company and enterprise that it is today. So warm welcome to both the speakers. Thank you very much for sparing time today. And I'm sure the audience is really looking forward to this. So I think we have about 45 minutes or so. And you know, the discussion is really up to you, how you want to steer it. And I think we have already had a brief chat on all the new declarations that have come from the government and what they mean. So I'm sure the audience is really waiting eagerly. So over to you both, Mekin and Mukeshji. And I think after about 45 minutes, I may come in again with some questions that audience might have posed for us in the chat box. So I'll come back probably with those questions to you. Over to you now.
Thank you so much, Vrinda, for the warm introduction. Happy to be here and happy to connect with you again, Mukeshji. Yeah, let me actually start off where Vrinda was leading us, which is we've had this massive announcement of 20 lakh crores. And as the details of it have poured in, given you've been in this space for far longer, I have only been, besides calling Flipkart a micro enterprise, if I include that, yes, I've worked in micro enterprises for a long time. But I've really started working in the micro enterprise space or the MSME space over the last 4 years. And hence, I would love to learn from you, Mukeshji, about your views on this package, right? What were, as details have come in, what are your early reactions to what do you feel happy about? What's gone well? And what do you think may be insufficient or may need more to happen?
Mekin, that's very nice of you to sort of say that you would learn from me. I think all my life I have been actually learning from micro entrepreneurs or small entrepreneurs. And you are a special person because you've helped the company to even grow from the micro to a much bigger one. But let me just come back to the question that you posed. I did look at the package and tried to grasp what is it that the government is actually trying to do. My sense that I got was that the government is giving a very clear message to the businesses here in India. Don't expect us to mother you. Don't expect us to give you entitlements. You have to fend for yourself. And the only thing that we can do and we must do is what falls into our domain, which is basically to infuse the liquidity which is required by you. But business is not just liquidity. Business is actually far more than just liquidity. And the role of the government was, first of all, to infuse the liquidity, which I think is the number one problem at this point of time. So they have really hit on the nail. Second, the government is also not opening its own purse, I would say. It's not really giving away the money. It's basically nudging the financial markets, the Reserve Bank of India, the banks, the financial institutions to unlock their purses. And in order to unlock, the government is saying that we are ready to give you standby guarantee and the credit guarantee and the 100% collateral free. In order to be able to give that, we are there to protect you in case there is a problem. So if it is 3 lakh crore, and if I really look at maybe 10% NPA coming out of this, the government is saying we are willing to unlock 30,000 crores. So with 30,000 crores, the government is saying that, okay, we'll set the market in motion. But the government also has gone a bit into what is called the deferment of some of the administrative or regulations which are required. So the dates which have to be postponed and all that, that also they have been able to do. The third thing which the government can and necessarily play the role is to get into demand infusion, on which we haven't heard anything from the government so far. And that I think is a very critical element. Either the government can directly buy from the MSMEs, which can help a great deal, except for saying that, for all tenders which are up to 200 crores, we will not allow the foreign companies to bid. The government hasn't really gone beyond that. And on the demand side particularly, I think the government also could have given some doles, not to the micro small enterprise, but certainly to the poor people at large. And if they would have got the money, they would have in turn dependent upon the micro small enterprises to buy their stuff. So I think that's where I would say that there has been a little bit of shortfall. But I am in game for the government, for their nudging the markets, particularly the banks as well as the microfinance institutions and NBFCs to take it forward. So I'm very much with them.
Yeah, I think the point that you raised about demand infusion, right? If I were to think about a medium entrepreneur, if I have had if I run a small unit and that has been shut down for the last 2 months. Now, depending on what I'm manufacturing and who my buyers are, if it is large businesses, there is one kind of problems that I face. If it's end consumers, then there is a separate kind of problems that I face. But let's come to that later. Right now, just the fact that I as an entrepreneur would have a demand challenge, that barring essentials and health supplies, there is almost no demand in the market
currently,
right? And as we start opening up, and we were just discussing that Bangalore and Delhi seem to have eased a little bit, so there is a little bit of market activity.
Economic
movement is starting to happen. I did see some electronics being sold. I did see a few other categories starting to ramp up, but sales are still far, far lower than regular time. And in such a time, I have fixed costs, and government's making it easier for me to get a loan, which I will have to pay back. right? Government's not giving me a grant, like you said. Would you think the small business entrepreneurs would be willing to take on loans, to take on this liquidity, and what kinds might be willing, what kinds may not be willing?
You see, whenever such a crisis happens, obviously there will be certain sectors which would be, gaining out of this kind of a problem. There will be certain sectors which will be losing out of this. And I would just compare it with maybe your household or my household or anyone's household. Say when the money becomes lesser, less available to our household, we do a restructuring, isn't it? We just get into what is called must have and like to have.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to the micro small enterprises also, they will also have to necessarily do this restructuring for themselves. They'll have to possibly find out whether they want to do a product restructuring. What they were making, can they move into something else? They will also have to do what is called the, customer restructuring. Those customers who are willing to pay sooner, faster, better, they'll have to possibly relook into that segment also. But they will also have to do a lot of more self-help, I would say. If they have to buy raw material, they'll have to look for those who are willing to give them, longer duration credit. They will also have to possibly find out ways of cost cutting at this point of time. There are normally, when you go to a small enterprise, you find that there are some assets which are dead and they have been lying for a long time. Quite like, look at my cupboard and I'll be able to throw out 25% of the stuff that I don't need it. This also happens in the small enterprise. So there is a lot of dead inventory, there are a lot of dead assets, and their assets are not just liquidable assets, they are also sometimes land, they also have sometimes some machinery, which they have not used it for quite some time. So I guess that this re-looking at what is feasible within my enterprise to restructure what I'm doing and what I should be doing is one very important element that the small enterprise will have to get into. Yeah. The second part, I guess, which the small enterprises will have to think of is not necessarily depend upon one's own self, but also to look at maybe groups of enterprises which are into same kind of a business and see if they can buy raw material together, if they can sell certain things together, if they can use each other's machinery together, if they can, use the contracted labor week by week or fortnight by fortnight, because they will not be running their enterprises for the full time. And those new ways of doing things is something that they will have to possibly learn. And here, I guess, also comes the role of the NGOs and the intermediaries who will have to look at it in a very business-oriented manner, not just getting grants and passing it on, or not just doing training programs and all that stuff, but actually understanding how the business can better function in the coming weeks and months, and then get involved into it and then see that how IT, health and hygiene, insurance, digital marketing, skill upgradation, all that which is required in the enterprises and group-based functioning can be undertaken at a better rate.
Thank you. I want to get into some of the things that you talked about, which is specifically the relook and restructure and listening to the market. But let me share some of my early thoughts when I started reading details of the package. I think firstly, compared to the initial first few moves that the government had done, which to me felt inadequate and actually very small, I do think this has been a larger move. So just from an overall capacity and size point of view, government is at least recognizing that we are now in a large economic challenge, because nothing so far that the government had done acknowledged that. I think that's, for me, is a good starting point. The next piece that I actually felt happy about was the specific focus and inclusion of NBFCs and MFIs.
Absolutely.
Who are the real ones who serve the SMEs, the small and medium enterprises. While banks also play a large role in serving the SMEs, very often because of higher risk levels, it's harder for banks to be able to do it. And hence, it's often the NBFCs and MFIs that end up serving them. So government actually taking cognizance of that and enabling them, for me, was another large positive. And actually specifically calling out that MFIs and NBFCs which might have lower ratings to also be capitalized and their first loss guarantee being borne by the government, I think is a large positive. I'm just now hopeful that the MFIs and NBFCs are able to be as aggressive or more aggressive than the government has been in reaching out to their customers. One of the questions and worry that I have is actually two questions. One is the speed of all of this. Right? That liquidity being the most important thing needed today, I think that's well recognized and it's written all over government's package, which is fantastic. But how soon can we get this money in the hands of the entrepreneur for them to start taking actions? I think that for me is one large question. The second question is just reach. And with reach, my specific worry is for the informal sector. That a very large number of Indian enterprises are informal in nature. And they often, and some of them may be borrowing from MFIs, and hence MFIs being supported at least lends a hand to them. But a lot of them actually work with money from money lenders and informal institutions or just individuals. And those are the ones, the small kirana, the chai shop, as in the guy you buy your vegetables from, those are the ones that I'm worried about. So if you have thoughts on both speed of how soon do you think this could reach and what might get in or reach, and any inputs there?
See, when I was looking at the package and going into the nitty-gritties of the details, at least to today's newspapers, I thought that this entire money of almost 3 lakh crore is actually available on tap now. So this is meant for those who already have borrowed from the banks.
Yeah.
So the speed is not really an issue. It's a matter of who is willing to ask the bank to automatically extend the additional credit.
Yeah.
So speed, I think, is not the central point. So you don't have to really go for an individual appraisal for every individual enterprise and all that. It's an automatic 25% or whatever increase that they want to take. My concern initially was whether this 3 lakh crore is adequate or not at the national level. And when I looked at the numbers, I got a sense that about 25 lakh crores is the amount which is given as a formal credit, whether it's through NBFCs or others. So I thought 3 crores for 25 crores is about 12% increase. And 12% increase in liquidity for micro and small enterprises is a good infusion. It's not small. But the point which I think was also raised by you and also in the earlier paper which was circulated was the delivery challenges, which is exactly what you are essentially saying. And here I think there was a bigger challenge that probably the government could have handled, is that when they are considering banker as a public servant. So every individual loan that one is actually giving, if it bounces back after a year, 2 or 3 years, this becomes a kind of matter of investigation against that banker. I think this is a structural element which is not necessarily related to COVID. But if you know, banking and giving away loans is also considered to be a business proposition where risk is actually involved, and if you can actually look at, if you have been involved in 100 loans and if 93 of them have worked well, 7 of them will actually go bad. It's a matter of going into detail whether it was because of structural reasons or external factors or because you had bungled up. But if you have bungled up, then it's a matter of procedural lapse. It's a matter of whether you were not careful enough to look into certain kind of detail. That's a different matter. But I think this was a good opportunity for government, which is already taking a couple of other reforms, which are again sort of on the labor front particularly, which again are questionable in certain respects, but in certain respects they seem to be in the right direction. Is if we can also at this point of time use this opportunity to solve some of the structural issues, which could also help us in the long run. And second, I think when the bankers have to give the money away, they have been playing very safe in looking at the collateral and just based on the collateral unlocking the money. This has nothing to do with this 3 lakh crore. This is fine. And then I thought that this was also a great opportunity for government to get into what is called bill discounting market, because that's where a lot of money of the small enterprises is stuck. And fortunately, the government has said that within 45 days, all the government and the PSUs will clear away all the pending payments. I think that's also a great move by the government. But this is also the time now to start building a strong national big market for bill discounting.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think your mention of structural changes, the one structural change that the government has done is the definition of MSME. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Like the upward movement, as well as manufacturing and services now having a standard rate to be included, as well as the shift from input-based to input or output-based definitions. How do you think this structural reform will play out?
You see, whenever you give a definition to an MSME, this has to be a dynamic definition. You shouldn't revisit it after 10 years just because there's so much of a clamor, for a simple reason that in place. So something which was 10 crores 10 years ago is obviously worth 20 crores. So in net terms, I think there is really no change. But something which has actually happened is that you have started looking at turnover as a criteria, which was not the case. I think that's a good move. But I would have loved to see doing away with the capital investment completely and looking at employment as a criteria, because that would have actually helped the government and statisticians to start looking at how our MSMEs or businesses are able to contribute to that. So I would have personally liked to look at turnover, which is required for the bankers and financial institutions, and for the government, a very critical factor would have been employment. Those two would have been a better option.
And it is a politically savvy move, right? To actually think about employment and enabling organizations that create employment, because we are looking at over 1 crore Indians turning 18 every year for the next 18 years. And we do not necessarily have formal sector jobs for most of them. So if, like you said, if the government had started looking at employment as one of the criteria for its benefits for organizations, it would have incentivized organizations,
Absolutely.
especially those that create more employment, a lot more.
And I would, sorry, I'm interrupting you, but even the subsidies, the kind of grants programs, if they can be linked around employment creation rather than how much investment you are creating, and we eulogize so much that we've been able to get so many $1 billion of investment and all that. If you can link it up with the number of jobs created, that would bring in a paradigm shift. Sorry.
Absolutely. Fantastic idea. I wish that this gets heard before this crisis is over. And the government is able to act around it. Completely agree. I do want to bring about this piece about that entrepreneurs cannot expect someone else to solve their problems. Right? Like you hinted at this, that's what the government's done. The government said, hey, I will do my bit. Right? And it is now the entrepreneur who has to figure out what could entrepreneurs or what should they be doing. And you mentioned a bunch of things, including like the fiscal pieces, as well as relooking and restructuring at them internally. What are some of your thoughts about entrepreneurs looking at markets and looking at opportunities? And what of it may be possible, what of it may not be possible, or what could, like you said, NGOs and others do to enable entrepreneurs to capture those opportunities or to be able to use those opportunities and scale their businesses? Because I don't think any entrepreneur's problem is going to be solved completely by anybody outside of their business.
Yeah, so resilience would essentially come in if the businesses have learned to cope with the problems of this kind. Resilience doesn't come in if bankers and financial institutions and government is only pouring in money. And that requires a kind of cultural shift, I would say. Cultural shift in having learned how to diagnose your problems and how to solve it. And I think the government's role at this point of time should also be, they have, I think, more than some 400 odd schemes of assistance for micro, small enterprises spread across some 15, 20 ministries in the, I'm talking only about the national level. State governments have their own schemes. So can we have, and those are very structured, too much detailed and saying that, where you can spend, how much money you can spend, what is the upper ceiling, what is the lower ceiling, and all that kind of stuff. And those are done essentially in a very audit friendly manner, because tomorrow if somebody questions them, somebody can just pour into and say, hey, did you actually do this? So it's a very input oriented structuring of the scheme. This is also the time, I think, where the government, when the Prime Minister said that there are 5 pillars to the self-reliance of the Indian economy, I wish he would have added a 6th element, probably, which was a very critical one, is to have trust with the businesses. And to say, we believe in you. So if you say that, okay, if you have given taxes in the last, let's say, couple of years, we believe that you are with the government, you are with the nation, you are with the economy. And therefore, can we say, okay, since you had paid in the previous year and you are now in a crisis, can we pay back all the taxes that you gave to us last year? And you then return to us over the next 3 years. That's the kind of what you call feeling that you can generate. And you can also have a couple of schemes which are more output and outcome oriented rather than, input oriented, how much you can get from the government. So if you say you are able to bring in and generate maybe 100,000 jobs or 1,000 jobs in your company or in your cluster, what can you do? And here I think a very critical element is that all our money which pours into what is called MSME schemes is probably 90% coming from the center and 10% coming from the state government and almost nothing from the local level. Whereas if you really have to promote the MSMEs, it is the local people who can understand it much better. And local people means local administration, municipality, mayor, and they have no clue about what is the local economy all about and how you can restructure it. So you have problems related to maybe living off labor, migrant labor. And we have seen this migrant labor going back and not being able to find good place for living in their local areas. These are the kind of structural aspects that the local people or local administrators can better understand it. And that can involve a lot of mutual working together with the businesses, with the local administrators, with the bankers, and with some of the central government schemes coming in to look at these dimensions and then be able to say we want to institute what is called outcome-oriented schemes rather than in input-oriented. So that requires a lot of trust. That requires a lot of mutual stakeholder consultations.
I think the things you have said in the last 3 minutes have sparked thoughts in my mind, which would possibly take a few hours for us to cover. I think the concepts of, specifically the concept of trust in a business, right, and structurally how our regulations are laid out, how cumbersome they are for a business to start off. So we at GAME were doing along with CCS, we're doing a ease of doing business study for small businesses. The EODB, ease of doing business, that happens at a national level happens for very large businesses, right? And while for large businesses, then you have things like compliance to contracts and so on, where India still struggles. For a small business, my personal view is that it should be trivial to be able to start. Right? And for starting, you should not be asked too many questions. It's just an experiment. It is an idea. It's an effort, and that effort should be not put obstacles against, but be rewarded. That somebody's trying. Right? And as you grow, as your business starts growing, then it's useful to have some checks and balances, and so regulatory compliances should increase and should possibly be, they shouldn't hold businesses back, but our largest of businesses should be held to very high standards, especially of governance. We have had examples of poor governance leading to very large businesses crashing. right? So we have what I would say an inverted legal structure, right? A legal structure which right now is very prohibitive, especially to the. So I'll tell a personal story of one of the chai shop entrepreneurs that we work with, and we'd got NID folks to help redesign this person's chai shop. And when he saw the designs, he said immediately that I can't afford this.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't understand him. I'm like, you don't have to pay for this. We'll pay for this. He said, no, it's not. You will pay for it one time.
Mm-hmm.
I will have to keep paying for it every month.
Mm-hmm.
Because if my chai shop looks good, I have to pay that much more to the government officials who visit my chai shop.
Yeah.
Because they believe that I'm earning a lot more.
Correct.
So that challenge that the chai shop owner cannot run a chai shop and cannot think of improving his chai shop, because if my chai shop improves, I have to pay more. Tells me of this inverted legal structure, and I wish that's something that we can address sooner rather than later. I do want to touch upon one other thing before we start taking in audience questions. That was around, like, in this new world. So firstly, is it a new world, right? What changes, and specifically, and you touched upon a couple of them, which is digital and hygiene, that those might get a fillip in terms of how SMEs run their businesses. Could you talk more about it? Like, in what ways do you think businesses will have to become more digital, or would have to care more about hygiene? And if there are any other new normals that would become important for every businessman or every businesswoman to think about as they design their business or redesign their business?
Yeah, so there are already some studies going on, and every now and then we keep hearing about, will consumer preferences change? Will I be concerned tomorrow when I have to go and buy some stuff as to what I'm buying, why am I buying, between the brands, between the choices that I had? Will there be a shift between pre-COVID and post-COVID? So I guess that this 2 months of lockdown has actually taught everyone something or the other. Our roles have changed within the homes also. We've started washing utensils. So we now realize that how difficult it is to mop the floor without a big handle attached on it. And if you were to do it squatting on the floor, how different it is. So I guess that understanding about when a fruit vendor comes on your door and delivers you certain things, the value of that. And I guess these things are going to stay. And for quite some time, people have to ensure that they have a 1 meter distance. They will have to make sure that they have hygiene. They also have to move on private transport. All those who can't afford it. We will find much lesser cars coming in, certainly on the roads, because many new people will continue to not new people. Many people will continue to work from home, because now it has been considered as new normal. And we already realize that whether it's government or it is IT firms or it is consulting companies, and they have already got a clear message that till December you can carry on, or maybe till 31st of March. And some of the companies have said, well, forever you can continue to do that, as Twitter has said. Well, this is the new normal. And I think this will have a lot of consequences on even the small businesses, because the psyche has changed. We have been at home, and some of the people may have done very well being able to work with the family, and some of them may have found very great difficulty. And therefore, to be able to peep into the psyche of the people and then reorient your business will certainly be necessary. It's not only for your workers, it's also what you are making, for whom you are making, what is your pitch, how are you using your digital marketing methods to reach out to the consumers. And those are the elements which I don't think are going to go away soon. And with that, I think the role of not only the small businesses, but also all those who are in the business of supporting the small businesses will also have to rethink of their own strategies.
Absolutely. I think this piece about changing customer psyche or changing, so the changes that are going on in a customer's life, because there are a lot of changes that are going on in customer's life, how does a small business entrepreneur listen actively to it and then redesign their business, to redesign their value proposition to align with some of this? So it's been surprising that a large number of businesses that we work with we were talking to them about what kind of capacity building would they be interested in. And we thought this was a great time for them to say, learn English, because they were sitting at home and this was possible. And they've come back with, no, teach us how to do delivery. Because we see customers buying from home, and there are online players who are able to deliver, and we want to be able to deliver. So how do we do this? Like, what is delivery? Kaise hoti hai? Can you help us with that? There's obviously been a lot of interest in learning how to go digital. We just created a self-learning video on using Zoom, and a bunch of small business entrepreneurs, street vendors tried it. And once everybody was on Zoom and they had 12 faces popping out of Zoom, they got their neighbors in to show them that, hey, look what's possible. I'm speaking to my cousin and I'm speaking to all of these other businesses who live far apart. So the joy of discovering the power of technology for them was fantastic. And I think those things, which is basically listening to the customer even more, and especially being able to use tools that a lot of higher end companies are able to do. A lot of, like Twitter has announced, for example, but like how do you get a small CA audit firm to go almost completely digital, right? And how can they work from home, and how can they do things for a bunch of their clients? And then obviously they are limited by how many of their clients are willing to work from home, and so on. But yeah, this is going to push the needle. I have one other question.
Megan, maybe one last question, and we also have some questions from the audience, so maybe that as well. Yeah, please go ahead.
So this is a question from when I was in college. I'd read the book from Akio Morita, Sony's founder, right? And it talked about the journey of Japan. While it talked mostly about Sony's journey, it talked about the journey of Japan after the nuclear blasts into becoming a place known for such high quality that made in Japan meant it was a symbol of pride, meant high quality across the globe. So Mukesh, if you had thoughts on how to, like, what might be the message and what could inspire Indian entrepreneurs to go about creating something that's truly world-class, to use this crisis to drive that inspiration. And the Japanese example comes like very alive to me, because I don't think at least in this pandemic, the whole world is facing it. At that time, Japan was the only one, maybe along with some other partners, but Japan was probably the most hit, and yet their bounce back was phenomenal. So are there thoughts that come up to you as I ask this question about how could we bounce back, and our bounce back be as meteoric as Made in Japan became?
Yeah, so when Japan had gone into this business, that time I think technical quality of the product there was a gap, I would say, and I think that's what Japan bridged that by coming up with world-class, great quality products. Now, unless you are into very local market where average products would also go well, I guess when you're dealing with the bigger players, quality now is considered to be a sine qua non.
Given.
given. So I guess at this point of time, with this shift which is coming in the consumer psyche, I think we have to, this is given, we have to go beyond, we have to think of quality plus.
Yeah.
So can we therefore think of whether our product gives that human element to someone who's might be willing to buy your product, because you say, look, this has been created by somebody who was on the, who really needs the money. And we are basically also dealing with now the environmental implications. So at least the upper end of the market is certainly looking for these things. And if we can possibly bridge that, that would be useful. But at an individual level, for a micro enterprise to come up with its own brand to depict that would be very difficult. So therefore, it has to be done maybe at a collective level, maybe at a geographical indication level to take it forward. Yeah. And I guess the point which you also made a little while ago, which was that you created a Zoom video package for this thing, training of the people on how to use e-commerce for the delivery of their products, or, you know, just knowing each other. I guess that's something which I wanted to highlight even strongly to ask you, and this is a final point from my side, because we're looking for question and answers from the friends, is that if you were to look for such videos or learning programs today, can I, as a small entrepreneur, find them on Google, on Coursera, on YouTube and all that? My sense is that the whole MBA that we normally do from IIMs and all that, can we unpack into maybe 100 different components, which includes inventory management, raw material sourcing, how to do production, how to do this, and in a very simplified manner that the small enterprise can pick it up. And if our corporate social responsibility people who have been so far very strongly working on and putting their money 80% and more on health and education, if they can also now look at livelihoods as a very critical component, and in that bring in these elements of learning for the people. And if we can scale that up and say, if there are 1,000 such videos available for people in multiple languages, that they can access it and know how to reduce my inventory for a simple thing, how to keep it, how to label it, how to find what you want to find out at a given point of time. And I've seen in many factories people fumbling and buying new materials when it's something which was lying already in their sacks of godown. So that I thought was a very important point, and it requires maybe further elaboration and very important to take it forward.
I agree with you, and I would love to collaborate with you, correspond with you on some of this work. But you're right that right now we do not have easy, accessible, non-hierarchical learning available in snippets that can be easily applied for small business entrepreneurs. And I think there's a large opportunity to be able to do that.
There is no MSME MBA. There is no micro MBA. There is no mini MBA. Absolutely. There is only corporate MBA.
And now there is a family business MBA.
Yeah, but this is also basically for bigger enterprises.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Brunda.
Yes. Okay, I think the first question that I'm going to ask you, and that came from the audience, kind of flows from this last point that we were discussing. So, so given this, communication channels to MSMEs are also one piece of the puzzle, probably. The question was, what is the efficient communication channel to help MSMEs understand right now about the package details so that they can avail those benefits? What are some of the possible efficient channels right now?
Nikhil?
Yeah, I would say this is in some sense my question I'd raised about reach, right? That the actual implementation, one is that the government has announced this, but right now, even for a mid-size entrepreneur, the mid-size entrepreneur needs to understand this and go and tap his banker that, dear bank, government has announced this, please give me my 25% that the government has already announced. So basic awareness of it, and which ideally should be run by the local bank. So it should be the banker who should be reaching out to the small businesses.
They have all the numbers, so they can just WhatsApp.
Exactly. So, but you know it, I know it, that's very unlikely to happen. Bankers would love to keep their books safe. So it is the entrepreneur. So it is, in some sense, we're looking at awareness campaigns that enable these at least medium-sized entrepreneurs to be able to understand that this is what their right is, which is almost step by step, very simple, because our policies otherwise or our schemes are very hard to read. Thankfully, this announcement has been easy, that this is automatic. 25% of the amount that you have taken a loan on, your bank will give, full stop, right? So now I think between that announcement from the finance minister to what the banker receives as their, what they have to operate, the banker can easily say that, hey, I haven't heard from my seniors, right? Because that communication flow might be slow and so on. So that is a large challenge. I do think besides that, the number of schemes, and Mukeshji touched upon it, that there being platforms that enable an entrepreneur to say who I am, and then all applicable schemes becoming visible. There are nonprofits like Haq Darshak, Indus Law that have tried doing this bit, but there isn't necessarily a single platform for SMEs to be able to understand this yet. And I think that's a large opportunity.
Yeah, it is. It is. Even I thought the same. And I think the second question kind of is also linked to this. The second question that was asked by someone was, how do we work with branch managers to help them move from intent to action? Because apparently they have already had some experience, the person who asked this question, in about 4 cases at least, where they went to a bank and this is still not happening because the banks are still, like you rightly pointed out, Mekin, are still very risk averse. So how do we move them?
Mukeshji, do you want to take a shot at it?
Yeah, I can think of maybe a COVID-like dashboard coming up by RBI and Ministry of MSME's MSME helpline, which says, bank-wise, what is the daily uptake of this particular program. And as soon as you get, there were, let's say, 100 borrowers of a local branch, and maybe 30 of them refused, that's okay. But 70 of them wanted it on the automatic tab, but how many actually have got delivered? And there you could say how many sanctioned, how many actually delivered, how many started paying. That kind of a dashboard, as we are getting daily figures about COVID patients and all that, we can also get it for this. If the government, they have a Ministry of MSME helpline, which has been just launched by them, or RBI can create it, or every bank can create it, and this can be all consolidated and seen how many are actually interested and how many, despite being interested, are not getting it. Yeah. And that will put pressure on the bankers also.
Yeah,
I think,
yes, Mekin.
I want to just add a bit to it that I think I have heard this story about intent and action, and I've really realized that there is a need for translation between the entrepreneur and the banker. Right? That the language the entrepreneur is talking about and what the banker wants to hear are just very different. Some of it can be done by simple translation and helping people, helping entrepreneurs to be able to talk the banker's language. That this is my proposal, right? Or this is versus saying that, oh, this is my income. The banker has no interest in the income. The banker wants your balance sheet. So simple stuff like that, which is enabling entrepreneurs to understand the banker's languages, or using intermediaries who understand both sides better to be able to translate this intent into action. I also think that the banker's intent is somewhat misunderstood. While the banker says that, hey, अच्छा project मिले तो मैं fund करता हूँ, but their definition of अच्छा project is possibly coming from 30 years back. And those definitions haven't necessarily changed. So while there is intent to fund a good project, I think the parameters that go underneath it need reform, need change. So we continue to look at primarily asset-based lending, while a lot of services businesses have no assets, right? So a service-based business automatically needs flow-based lending, right? And if India is going to be a service-based economy, our banking systems have to respect and enable flow-based lending. But right now that job is being done by a bunch of fintech companies who are learning banking 101. So
80% of all our MSMEs are service enterprises.
Exactly. But our banks continue to do asset-based lending.
That's why they have very less money
Exactly.
going to the service industry.
So that I feel is a fundamental structural reason behind the intent
agree.
and action gap.
Yeah, I think the question of definitions also brings me to another question that somebody has asked. And I understand that there has already been a lot going on about this change in the definition, because that has caught everybody's attention as much as the other stimulus package and everything. So the question was, won't changing the definition of MSMEs enable bigger companies now to take advantage of the schemes at the cost of actual micro industries? So what do you feel about that?
You see, we had given a input to the government saying that, look, anyway, 99% of all the enterprises are with less than 1 lakh rupee of investment. So even when the definition was 25 lakhs, it was way above, the 99 or 98% of the enterprises, which were basically household and, 2-people company and so on and so forth. So I guess nothing has changed really. We had basically suggested to the government if they can create a category of what is called tiny enterprises or something, to focus something exclusively for them. As far as the upper end is concerned, it doesn't matter. Anyway, it had to be covered with inflation, as I said. And if there was a dynamic definition and it was inflation linked, we would have already reached where we have reached.
So I want to add to it. Very early in my career, I used to be doing what's now called data science, right? And one of the first statistics lessons I learned was when you have a very, very large tower in a histogram, break it down, right? So right now what has happened is the largest tower in the histogram has been made larger.
Exactly.
Right. And what that does is that our ability to understand this tower goes down significantly. And now who is it that we are catering to? Because this definition is supposed to be catering to the street vendor, and it's also catering to somebody who's made a significant investment. Right. And you will end up having the same policies for both. So I do, and I actually I had a Twitter discussion on this, and a bunch of friends actually poured in. So there are at least 2 good reasons to think about doing this. One is that our previous boundaries of definition, and hence what comes with as benefits of being a small enterprise, were lapsing at a certain point, and hence people were refusing to grow. So now at least people would grow up to the current limit, right? So it at least serves as a band-aid and in enabling very small enterprises to grow a little bit, and they don't lose their benefits or perks till they get to this new level, which is I would say a semi-valid point, but I still think of it as band-aid, that you do need to fix it for the next size. You have to incentivize businesses to grow, right? That unless businesses really want to grow and you have legal garbage that's keeping them away from growing, we're not going to be able to create an economy that's powering us to where we want to be, to the 5 trillion that we want to be.
See, the benefits which Mekin you said, which probably we believe that micro or small get, the outreach and the quantum is not there. That all the taxes which are paid for are essentially GST, and the direct income tax and the indirect, both of them have no relevance to the size. And in terms of administrative things also, it's an old story when, DICs used to give quotas and all that. It's all gone. There is practically no benefit, according to me, except for maybe some schemes of assistance. And those schemes of assistance anyway have a very limited outreach. So I guess it doesn't matter.
That
you
said,
have to basically target something which is for the high household and the real tiny ones. And you need a different legislative framework. And specifically, I would say the focus has to be on what you said was ease of doing business for them. That's because all the laws which are available for the corporates in the bigger enterprise are also valid for them. Yeah. And it doesn't work.
No sense.
That's the critical part.
Yeah. I think we are almost out of time. I really hate to interrupt this very interesting discussion, but I think there are sessions lined up, and I believe, Mekin, you also have another session coming up. So unfortunately, we have to end this discussion here, but hopefully we'll be able to pick up some of these threads sometime soon as well. And thank you very much to both our speakers. Thank you, audience. I think the takeaways, the two most important takeaways I would just like to highlight. I think on the financial inclusion for MSMEs part, we think that government has started something good, but how it translates on the ground will be a critical measure of success. I mean, we can't just rest easy because government has declared something. How it translates, how it gets done is equally important. And we will probably all have to see how we can kind of push some effort by way of making MSMEs aware, helping them avail the benefits of these schemes, as well as maybe creating some kind of an ecosystem push to say, bankers, please do that, please do lend, please do fulfill your obligation right now. And something like a dashboard, I really like that idea as well. And I think the second bit, which is beyond financial inclusion, which is talking about a whole lot of capacity building requirement for the MSMEs, for them to be able to grow. And that is not just COVID specific, of course. I mean, in terms of how they can actually become more digitized, how they can become more savvy, but be linked with the markets, etc. There is a whole lot to be done there as well. So I think with those takeaways is where we will have to end today's discussion. But like I said, hopefully we'll come back to it sometime real soon. And thank you very much to both the speakers. Thank you to the audience as well. Thanks
Thank you,
very
Vrinda, and thank you, Mekin.
Thank you, Mukesh. Thank
Pleasure.
you. Likewise.